Well, welcome everybody. Uh, we've got more people to come, I think, so they'll just sort of crawl in as time goes on. Um, we've got really, I think, thrilling people tonight. Um, I'm really excited to hear about Elaine's research. I mean, disability culture is so important to me. So, what students today want? What do do they want something different than what we want? And how do we bring it to them what it is that's different that they need from us, because those of us that are elders, we want to pass it on, but it'll be more receptive if we know how to do it the right way. So I'm hoping your research is going to help the collective, figure out how to bring youth into our group so that we can make things happen in a better way. And then later we're going to be hearing about what it's like in these troubled times that we're living through, what it's like to be disabled, um, and the different parts that intersect with us, how those things affect us in terms of our disability, and in terms of how difficult it is right now to be disabled. I think it's probably more difficult right now than it's been I mean, I'm 72 years old and I don't remember disability ever being in the way it is right now. I mean, we're just everywhere you turn, we're being pulled down. So I think it's a unique time. So can't wait to hear your perspective. And so Sharon's going to go through some slides for us about what sort of the format is for tonight.
And if you haven't been here before, I'm Alice Wershing, and I am traveling today, so I'm off screen. But welcome to Devva's Room. If you have not been with us, we hope you will join us again. Tonight's presentation, we have two, as Susan said, exemplary presenters, as we always have. I am also looking forward to hearing about both topics. We will have Nirmala Erevelles, Thinking About Disability in Troubled Times, and Elaine Gerber, Building Disability Culture on College Campuses. There is a QR code on the screen right now where you can find information on future and past events, registration, playlists, and donation opportunities about Devva's Room. It is co-sponsored by Disability History and Cultural Collective, DHACC, and I Love You Lead On Community. Next slide. If you need help during the session or have some accessibility requests that you need to get to us, you can request a voice option during the presentation. You can send an email to leadon, capital L-E-A-D, capital O-N, at capital I, love, capital L-O-V-E, you, capital Y-O-U, hyphen, lead on, capital L-E-A-D, capital O-N.com. Next slide. For our Zoom etiquette and access, we want to make sure that all the attendees are muted, and that will support access and reduce some background noise. If you need to use voice to communicate during the presentation, again, you can email us. We'll arrange a separate voice space just for that. After the presentation ends, of course, we'll have a short break in between both. We'll open up the mics for conversation, and that will be unrecorded, one voice at a time as usual. Chat comments will be read aloud to provide access, and if you don't want chat read aloud, use a private message. Next slide. As far as accessibility information, ASL is provided for the presentation and will be spotlighted. Auto captions are available and can be viewed on screen or as a transcript. In the Zoom toolbar, there's a CC option. If it is not there, click the three dots for more options and locate it there. The ability to show, hide, or adjust captions is there, as well as the option to view captions as a transcript. Next slide. What makes Devva's Room unique? Disability studies tends to be discussed in academic settings using complicated jargon, making it inaccessible to many. Here, we take it out of the classroom and into conversation. In keeping with that, we invite our ASL interpreter to participate fully, asking questions and joining the discussion if and when they have them. Next slide. Devva's Room sessions are recorded. All Devva's Room sessions are recorded and will be available on our playlist within a few days with corrected captions and transcripts. You can find the playlist on the Devva's Room website at bit.ly/Devva's Room, capital D, EVVAS, capital ROOM. There's also a QR code on the screen. Next slide. And without further ado, we will let our presenter start. Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Elaine Gerber. I guess I'm going to go first. I am going to share my screen so I can share my slides. And if anyone wants to sort of follow along, read along, or just have a copy for yourself, I'm putting a link to them in the chat. They are, I think the link is share setting is for everyone, so it shouldn't be a problem, I hope. Okay, so hi again, everyone. I'm Elaine Gerber, and this talk is called Building Disability Culture on Campus, a tribute to Corinne Kirchner and Devva Kasnitz, really Devva, but also Corinne. And I just have to say a few things about that. I'm really honored to be here tonight, and I want to thank Susan Fitzmaurice for inviting me. I'm moved beyond words, and I apologize that I might get a little emotional. Devva was a very, very important person to me, personally and professionally. And obviously I'll say more about that soon. But this past year, I also lost another longtime mentor, colleague, and friend, Corinne Kirchner. Both of these women, in different ways, contributed to who I am today and the kind of work that I do in the world. So I really would like for tonight to honor both of their memories. So before I jump in here, just as an access note, I will read the text that's on the slide, and I'll also describe the images. And I mentioned already in the chat, there is a link to the slides if people want to follow along or have a copy. Okay, so about me briefly, for the many of you who, I don't know if you know me or don't know me or know me only in a professional setting, but very briefly, my bio. I grew up without a disability label in New Jersey. I have conditions that I've had my whole life, but I never received a disability identity as far as schooling and that kind of thing. I think like most people who were smart and did well in school and were white in the 60s and 70s were considered to be gifted. And we not yet have a language of neurodivergence. So, you know, for good or for bad, I didn't have a disability label. I do now identify as disabled, although not because of neurodivergence. I went through a period of about 5 years and had like 6 miscarriages. So that was what really kind of broke me. And if you will, it's not something I feel disabled and proud about, but it is part of my identity now. I went to the University of Michigan, and this was a really like proud, good thing for me. I loved being there. I had a great undergraduate experience, and then I took some time off to kind of figure out who I was and what I was going to do with my life. And I ended up moving to California to be a hippie, and also to knowing that it was affordable education and I was going to go back to school at some point. So I did get a PhD, and it's in anthropology. I finished that in 1999, at which point I decided I was going to move to New York to do applied work. And I really didn't know what that meant. I had no plans. I had no job. I had actually nowhere to live. It wasn't really the smartest move, perhaps professionally, to pick up and do this, but um, anyway, so that is part of my story. And I ended up very, very lucky, and I landed a job um, at the American Foundation for the Blind, working for Corinne Kirchner. I was there for 5 years, and I really consider that to be like the finest postdoc I could have ever had. Um, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then after about 5 years there, I needed to leave and um, do something else. And I was lucky enough to get this job at Montclair State University in the anthropology department, a very, um, at the time, even a very rare tenure track job. And I know those are even fewer and far between there. So I will never leave. I will always be there. And hopefully they'll let me stay there forever. So what we see at the bottom, there's a picture of campus. This is one of the main buildings on campus. It has this kind of white adobe outside, red tile, sort of a Spanish style architecture, colonialist architecture, that is all over campus for some reason, but that's our campus. And in the upper right corner is a ceramic strawberry that I made, and I'm holding in the tip of my fingers because as much as I love my academic work and my disability studies advocacy and all these other things, I think in my heart of my hearts, I am still just a potter. So my career path, it sounds so linear, like and organized when I present a bio, but in truth, it really looked like this. And so what you see on the screen here is just some squiggly line because we're not at all linear. It just seems that way. So I want to just for a minute shout out about Corinne Kirchner, and there's a picture of her on the right side of the screen. I worked for her for 5 years in the Policy Research and Program Evaluation Department. We traveled together to numerous conferences. We shared rooms. We knew each other very, very well. She taught me to write, seriously, better than anything I had ever gotten in any of my formal education. She is had a terrific intellect and a fantastic sense of humor. And for those of you who like quirky intellectual humor, this is a live link to a piece she published. She would put out these monthly statistical briefs. And so she published one at one point on April 1st, using all of the typos that she had collected about blindness over the years. So anyway, it's very funny. So she also was the person who sent me to my first Society for Disability Studies conference shortly after I started at AFB. I think I started in May and the conferences used to be held in June. So I didn't even have my feet on the ground. And she's like, you should go. So, okay, I went, and it was transformative. Utterly transformative. I obviously met a lot of fantastic people, which is why I'm here. But I also felt this incredible sense of inclusion and welcome. I felt a great sense of belonging, and that really did expand and change how I felt about community. So Corinne was an incredibly powerful mentor and instructor, just like Devva. And as you all know in this room, Devva was like the consummate teacher, always, whether formally or informally, using any kind of disability experience to kind of teach a lesson and push people to think further and to think differently. And she and I feel so lucky to have encountered her because we had many overlapping interactions and connections. Of course, our work for the SDS and our love for the Society for Disability Studies, we overlapped there. But we also overlapped in our anthropology work. So We built panels together at the time when I was doing this, starting this in like 2000. There were not a lot of anthropologists doing disability work. I think there's some more now, but it's not a lot. And so the 6 of us or the 9 of us or however many there was not a lot. We would always either build panels together or because whoever was organizing the conference said, "Oh, you do disability." And so they would put us on panels together. But this was true. We saw each other at the Society for Applied Anthropology, the AAAs, which is the main professional anthropology meetings, but also at SDS. So I saw her about 3 times a year regularly, at least, if not more. And I also had the good fortune of going to Guatemala to teach with Devva for a couple of weeks at the Napa Field School. We became good friends and comrades and visited each other. And we were often mistaken either for each other or as sisters, which I'm not sure if that's, where that was coming from, but I guess maybe I'll chalk it up to the hair. At any rate, she had a huge impact on me, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little emotional about this right now, but I tried to find a picture of us together on a panel, and I found this from the Society for Applied Anthropology. It was taken in 2019. This was a picture that was actually posted to Twitter back when it was Twitter. The caption read, "An impromptu celebration by Sarah Savito, Devva Kasnitz, and Elaine Gerber on the news that Nella Konsensky," I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing their name, "has been hired at the American Anthropologist as the first accessibility and meeting coordinator." And that was in large part due to Devva's advocacy. Sarah is on the left. Devva is in the back behind Nell. Nell is sitting in the front in a white long sleeve shirt with black polka dots on it, and a red bow tie, and I'm standing at the podium waving hi. Devva was a fierce advocate in anthropology. She really pushed the professional organization very much until her end to be more inclusive of disability in the way that we think of disability here, but also in terms of really big things like this idea that you should go across the world and be alone and kind of the sole researcher in this isolated context was very ableist, and she fought against that whole premise of anthropology. But she pushed and pushed and pushed because her whole professional career in anthropology, she was basically told she couldn't do it and was rejected or hit with a barrier every single time. And she never stopped. She pushed and pushed and pushed. And so when I came along into the field and we overlapped so much, I was really, I think I kind of helped, not because I was such an advocate, but because there was another person doing serious intellectual work on this topic. And, it was kind of, you couldn't ignore that there were kind of a critical mass starting to challenge set assumptions. So both Devva and also Corinne, their passing was really deeply personal for me, as well as professionally impactful. They were both friends and mentors, neither of whom I got to say goodbye to in the very end. So again, I'm really grateful to be here and to be able to share how much they meant to me and changed my life. So it's an opportunity to be a tribute to both of them who shaped me and my intellectual work, as well as ideas about community building. So speaking of community building and creating culture change, as famous anthropologist Margaret Mead said, quote, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Unquote. Both women valued my activism and determination, and I hope I have lived up to their examples and expectations. So without further ado, let's get to the research. So building community and disability culture on campus is an ongoing process. And I have been going at it, if you will, since I started there. And sometimes it's the 3rd or 4th attempt. Other things came a lot more easily. But there's really 4 major initiatives that I want to talk about. And some of them I actually was hoping you all could help me with, because I'm not sure where to go from here. So these 4 things or prongs, if you will, that I have been trying to approach it, is that I, along with others on campus, we founded a disability caucus for faculty and staff. We brought the national organization DREAM. We brought a chapter to our campus. I personally have done research and publishing work about disability culture on campus, and then also through curricular efforts. Okay, so starting with the first one, this caucus, this actually in part came because of my experience at SDS and feeling like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm struggling with technology here for a second. For my feeling at SDS, that I mentioned that I had this great sense of community and welcoming, and I would see people. I had this very strong disability activist community, but I only saw people maybe once a year. And I would contrast this feeling of warmth and wonderfulness with going to my campus and not having that, and not feeling a sense of belonging either in my small department or kind of more broadly across campus. So for me, it was a personal thing about wanting to build that kind of community, but we also needed to create change, culture change, and a lot of other kinds of things. So I helped to create it. I was a board member for the first 5 years. We launched just before COVID. The structure remains and is ongoing, and they are working on kind of structural change. This graphic is just a white background with a bunch of people, pink people. They're graphics. They're not real people, of people with a variety of different kinds of impairments. So I'm sorry, I'm just keep trying to get these little thingies off the screen that I have. Okay, so there were essentially three aspects of the caucus that we were working on. One had to do with access on campus because we still had a lot of access issues. We were also trying to change the culture of campus around disability and to create some kind of governance structures that sort of supported this. And I, in addition to being on the executive board, I worked a lot on the kind of cultural programming. Which I guess made sense given my interests as an anthropologist. And I just have this one pro tip was the idea that I wanted the things that we put on, we needed to de-ghettoize disability, meaning to take it out of its niche and broaden the reach. So we wouldn't just have conversations amongst ourselves. We really needed to bring in other aspects of the campus community. So we gave a talk about and had experts and fabulous people come and talk about blindness and art, and invited all of the art and design community and brought them involved and held it in a gallery. We had Susan Birch come and talk about Native people and institutionalization. So, again, people who are into Indigenous justice or anti-institutionalization, like also had an interest, so they could come and then learn about disability. We had a commitment ceremony to encourage disabled marriage equality. We had film festivals and so much more. That same graphic is at the bottom here. I think this was very successful, and we need to do more of it, but there isn't really an institutional structure for hosting accessible events on our campus. So it was a lot of work that it wasn't sustainable for me. The second kind of prong of the work that I've been doing to bring disability culture to campus had to do with this idea of having a DREAM chapter. So DREAM stands for Disability Rights, Education, Activism, and Mentoring. And it's a national organization, for those of you who don't know, but we created a chapter on our campus to help build, again, a structure for disabled people, for community, for support, and all these things. And this is a picture here on the right of Talia Steinmetz. Thank you, Talia. Huge shout out to you. She is a former student of mine. We are still good friends and work closely together. And the picture here is she is of her in her graduation attire with the stole and the hat and the gown, and she's holding the leash of her service animal, who's a black lab, who's also, although it's hard to see in this picture because he's black and the gown is black, but Rory, the dog, is also wearing a graduation cap and gown. And it was really Talia who brought the chapter to our campus, who worked with me to kind of create the first opportunities of events for students around DREAM. And she was an incredible, incredible leader. But she said to me, I wouldn't have pushed so hard for this if it had already existed. I thought she was just a raging disability, activist. And she really only kind of stepped up into that role because it was needed. So that's also telling about process, I think. So she's graduated, and I'm working with a fabulous grad student right now who's also kind of taken the helm, but we definitely struggle to recruit new members in part, I think, because of the age of young people, and they are not yet, if you will excuse the expression, quote, radical Crips. They're still kind of coming into their identity. And so it takes a while, and they're not necessarily interested in either identifying that way or taking on leadership positions. Some of them are, but a lot of them aren't. So this is a struggle to promote the organization, to recruit new people, to get people involved, to get it registered as a registered student organization. Something I'd like to talk about with you all more at the end if we have time. The other things we're doing is to create a kind of a fact sheet for students, because our Disability Resource Center on campus is, I'll be diplomatic and say, overwhelmed. But the students aren't really very happy with the services that they're receiving to a large extent. They don't know what to ask for as far as accommodations. They might be just learning about a new condition or something for the very first time. And so they'll go into this office and they'll say, great, how can you help me? And they'll say, well, what do you need? And they don't know. So they usually get like extra time and maybe a note taker. And I'm not sure that's really the most helpful or the only thing that people need. So we're trying to get a lot of input and to create a kind of by students for students about things you can request and access and stuff like that. And the SGA lobbying is, there's no, that's Student Government Association. There's no access or inclusion rep. So that's something we're trying to get added so that there can be, again, more light shown on the issues. And this slide is just a screenshot from the National Organization of DREAM. For those of you, if there are any young people on the call who are in college or thinking about going to college, DREAM's a fantastic organization. And this is, again, a live link at the top. The National Organization has tons of resources, and I highly recommend checking it out. Okay, so the third prong of what I've been working on has to do with academics. So publications and research. And there's really two things that I've been working on in the last 5 years or so that have really kind of grown and into legs of their own, if you will. So one is what I've called Artifacts of Ableism, which is a research project on architecture and symbols on campus. And the second is an assessment or an evaluation of campus culture, which I call Just Listen to Us. I'm going to talk about each of these for just a second. In just a second. Okay, so the first one, oh, thank you for putting the link in the chat. The first is an article. There's a picture on the right is just the front page of the printed version of this article that's called Artifacts of Ableism, Semiotics of the Built Environment and Disability Identity on University Campuses. And you might notice that my name here is at the bottom. I worked with two students, obviously Talia herself and another former student, Will Williams. And so talk about building community, being able to mentor other students the way I was mentored by Devva and Corinne, it really meant a lot to me. And that we got this article published was phenomenal. So I have a couple of points to make about it without going in great detail, but like our campus community, I studied our campus community. You know, when traditionally anthropologists went halfway around the world, and you don't need to do that anymore, and especially for disabled scholars. While you might want that experience, because that's what makes you kind of legit in their big picture mind, people don't have to do that anymore and haven't had to do that for 20, 30 years. But it's even more so now that, you know, my personal life was such that I couldn't leave my home and go places, but I could examine the community and the culture at work where I was. The other thing, I mentioned the second point already about working with former students, but the last bullet is, yes, of course, ableism still exists. So like, would I like to say when we did this report and like everything's great? No, it isn't. But even beyond that, I just have to say, because we sent this to a different journal. I talked earlier about kind of de-ghettoizing our work, and yet you'll see this is in a disability studies journal. This is the Journal of Disability Studies in Education. We had previously sent it to a different publication. And reviewer 2, why is it always reviewer 2? Reviewer 2 is always mean. Reviewer 2 said, literally their main comment, well, you never justified why disabled people needed to be in higher education. I'm sorry, what? Like this was in, 2022? Like 30 years after the ADA, and we have to justify disabled people belonging in higher ed. My jaw hit the floor and I said, we're going to send it somewhere else I don't care that they they had it for so long. We're sending it somewhere else. They're just never going to publish this here, and I don't want to fight with them. So anyway, we moved on. Okay, so the abstract I will read, and keywords are at the bottom, but this article examines the impact that signs, readable as text and discourse embedded in architecture and the built environment, have on shaping disability knowledge among undergrad students on college campuses. And I'm sorry, Susan, because that was a lot of jargon. But hopefully when I explain about the article, it will make sense. So we used reflexive photography as a research tool and speculated that the architectural signs, these artifacts of ableism, are misrepresenting disability and also essentializing what it means to be disabled. This results in an othering of disabled population. It perpetuates stereotypes about disability on college campuses and limits a sense of inclusion. Further, by remaining focused on access, this distortion obscures identities within the disability community and operates counterfactually to disabled communities' culture. So we presented several solutions, including a universal design approach that can help modernize the language of the built environment and help improve access and create a sense of belonging for contemporary students. The keywords were semiotics, big word, disability, ableism, architecture, signs, and campus. No, I didn't, but I'll come back to that in the chat. Sorry. This built on the work of many others in the field. Like this was not but a lot of work, a lot of scholars, and this is a typo, and I apologize. It wasn't in SDS. It should be in disability studies that examine the symbols of disability and has those shaped identity of disabled people, but also of how it shaped how others thought of disabled people. So the symbols can reinforce cultural norms, but it can also help to change how people think. And specifically, everything with an access sign is interpreted by non-disabled people as being inclusive and helpful, kind of these positive valence. But for many disabled people, these markers felt alienating as they're a symbol. They signal that you are an afterthought and don't really belong here. So the quote from the piece says, the built environment on campuses contributes to a socially constructed idea of disability identity, one that reinforces society's traditional and ableist perception of disability while alienating those who embrace disability culture. So a lot of the earlier research has focused on this ISA, the International Symbol of Access. And on the right, there is that traditional symbol. It's a blue background with the white wheelchair user. And instead of saying access, I put a piece of blue tape over it and wrote resist. There's also a little braille at the bottom. So the previous literature kind of has identified that spaces designed for alternative access and demarcated with the ISA, this international access symbol, have a negative effect of communicating a divided society, one where that's kind of split between normals and others. And the latter, other, is generalized as wheelchair users. And so if this is designating space as accessible, then anything that's not marked with this symbol becomes exclusive and is inferred to be inaccessible and off limits to the disabled community. Paradoxically, that icon that's supposed to present barrier-free architecture also signifies disablement as much as it signifies facilitated access. And these authors also note that this simultaneously directs disabled people who need accommodations to kind of special, in quotes, or segregated locations. So we wanted to, given that was the context, we wanted to use reflexive photography. So we had students taking pictures and reflecting on that, on their images as the data collection method. The research team, myself and the two former students, we interpreted the visual and textual data about access features on our campus that were collected by a heterogeneous sample of our undergrads. These participant researchers were drawn from general ed classes, and there were about 90 people who participated either in the image collection or in some focus groups. And in total, there were about 450 images from the 48 sets that were coded with 147 thematic codes. It was a lot. It was a real lot. Okay, this is fabulous. So when I was starting this process, I reached out to the director of institutional research and asked if they knew how many disabled students were on campus. And they wrote me back in writing, I quote, "We don't collect data we don't need," unquote. It's kind of a really horrific way of saying that, but I, in my more generous moments, understand what they meant, which is that there's no reporting requirement. So um, many universities, not just mine, don't collect disability data like they might for other demographic categories of race or gender, instead hiding behind these kind of FERPA or HIPAA or other privacy laws and policies. The Higher Ed Opportunity Act did require schools to report on the College Navigator the percentage of students who are disabled and provide a link to their Disability Resource Center. I don't know if that's still happening under the current administration. However, we did use these data, and this was only an aggregate number, and it really, so the total number, there was no breakdown, and it represented only those students who are actually registered with the Disability Research Office, I'm sorry, Disability Resource Office, or who are receiving accommodations. So I don't need to tell you this. It obviously, where there's a huge lack of data, a misrepresentation and an undercount. So it was inaccuracy about prevalence rates. The National Center for Educational Statistics found, so in 2022, pretty recent, that only 37% of students who self-reported a disability in college informed their school. That's powerful. Like a third of students who self-reported having a disability told their colleges that. Most people kept it hidden. So clearly, the existing disability data represents a significant undercount of disability on not only on my campus, but on campuses more broadly, unless they're specifically collecting these data. So at Montclair, we worked with what we had. And the most recent report from the DRC, the Disability Resource Center, indicated that about 20% of MSU student body had registered. I'm just going to pause there for a minute also. Given the undercount, and that like 2/3 students don't report or tell their schools or register, we had about a fifth of our campus registering at the DRC. That's a huge amount. And yet, for all intents and purposes, our campus treats it like it doesn't exist. The three most common types of disability that were disclosed by students to the DRC had to do with ADHD, autism, and mental and emotional health. Nonetheless, wheelchair users, who are a very small percentage, maybe 2.3% of the general population, we don't exactly know how that translates to college campuses, might be higher, might be lower, but they serve as the representative symbol of disability and access, despite being actually pretty rare. So we can talk about this later. What might be a better symbol? I'd love to have that conversation. In this research, we asked, what does this iconic symbol represent to contemporary undergrads? So we are 30 years past the ADA, for example, and do these signs signal something that students recognize as speaking to themselves or that otherwise signals their identity and belonging, or do they find it alienating? And on the right, I have a wheelchair symbol, this ISA, blue background, white wheelchair guy with words that say access at the side of the building and an arrow to the right. Here is an image from our research, from our article itself. And on the left side is a photograph that one of those participant researchers, the students, took. That is a crosswalk on campus. And on the right side of the image, there's some text, which I will read. It says, the photo example by a participant researcher. The PR categorized this image as under ableism, noting the quote, raised curb difficult for wheelchair users, unquote. That's how they tagged it. And quote, this has a flat curb on one side of the sidewalk, but not the opposite end. To get access to the other side of the sidewalk, you would have to go on the street and risk being hit by a car. There should be a lower curb on the other side as well, unquote. Based on this description, the image was coded as barriers not accessible, barriers dangerous, wheelchair reference, physical elements, and walkways and footpaths. So if you look closely, this side closest to us is the level path that a wheelchair user or someone could walk straight down, but it's on the far end of the image that they were talking about where there's no curb cut. So a couple dominant themes emerged, and these had to do with disability being essentialized as wheelchair users, not just mainly wheelchair users, but like essentialized, like that this is individualistic and located in their bodies, essentialized. And also this idea about specialized services as good. Okay, so about the wheelchair user, these signs communicated a version of disability whose object is wheelchair access, and usage accounted for about a quarter of the images. So it was a very popular thing to capture for the students. They took lots of pictures of wheelchair and wheelchair access. Again, nationally, it's only about 2.3% of people who use a wheelchair, another close to 8% who have some other kind of mobility aid, a cane or walker. More recent research has looked and estimated under 10% of American undergraduates with a disability report some kind of orthopedic or mobility impairment. Doesn't mean they're wheelchair users. So we still don't really know how well that represents, but it's a small percentage, and it's 10% of undergrads with a disability report orthopedic or mobility impairment. So it's still, again, a smaller portion of the rest of the disabled student body, yet that's the symbol that's chosen. And furthermore, the focus on the tool as the sign, the tool, the access tool, whether it's a white cane or a wheelchair, rather than the person, ended up dehumanizing disabled people, and it made people feel dismissed, including and especially those with invisible disabilities. A student wrote, I feel like when people think of disability, they equal it to visible disability. The architecture tends to think more towards adding ramps and parking spaces, etc., to accommodate those with a disability, but they don't think about disability as a whole, unquote. The other thing that kind of emerged, which I really personally struggle to analyze and make sense of, was this idea that specialized services are good. My upbringing in disability culture and in disability studies often meant that specialized services were segregating and bad. But here, that wasn't how the students interpreted it. So specifically, there was a separate shuttle for people with disabilities on campus. We do not have an accessible fleet of buses, so they have a separate shuttle. And when the university identifies a single shuttle as accessible, they imply that all the other shuttles are inaccessible or off limits to the disability community. If anything without this special disability or designation operates under, quote, an assumption of general lack of access, unquote. That's Tanya Tichowski's work that I was citing there. But also, I will add, that's not on here, is that there were policies that segregated people on our campus. So if you were a non-wheelchair user and you were like waiting at the bus stop with your bestie and wanted to ride together, the disability shuttle would come and the wheelchair user could get on, but you couldn't ride with them. You had to wait and go on the other bus. So it really kind of very clearly segregated people and broke up community. Yet, as the second point here notes, the students coded these separate shuttles with positive references. They would say it's easy access, an accessible bus, it's inclusive, it's assistive, helpful. And other language like that had a positive valence. So I just want to pause here for a second because there are structural reasons why that makes sense. Our campus is very long. You know, it's not all densely populated in the center. It's very long and stretched out. It's very hilly. And the disability shuttle would pick people up door and drop them off door to door. So it did have some advantages over the regular shuttle system. One of the things that we noticed, though, was that direct ableism, or rather ableism, could be seen and noticed when it was referencing wheelchairs. So students could see ableism when it came to wheelchair users, but less so for other people, and especially people with invisible disabilities. So some people did see the shuttle as segregating. They noticed that it segregated students, and they also noted other negative aspects, not just the segregation, but the fact that additional time is required to use it. You have to schedule it in advance. There's no spontaneity, no option to stay late after class or to go out spontaneously with friends. Dolmage elsewhere argues that these special solutions or retrofits are not designed for people to live and thrive with a disability, but rather to make disability go away. The aspiration here is not to empower students to achieve with disability, but to achieve around disability or against it or in spite of it, unquote. And so we summarize that it disallows a positive and proud attitude towards disability, which is a core tenet of disability culture. It also makes one wonder about kind of how temporary these institutional and temporary fixes are. So that was one thing they kept saying, well, we only have the separate shuttle until we can make the whole fleet accessible. But I've been there for quite a long time. We have not had an upgrade of the regular shuttles. Speaking about inclusion, this sort of othering occurs for wheelchair users, of course, and students with other kinds of mobility impairments, as I noted, but it's also really much more alienating for disability students who have non-mobility issues, disabled students with non-mobility issues. Excuse me, it's late in the night for my speaking. Students struggling with mental health issues or who identified as neurodivergent, for example, associate these symbols with wheelchair users, and they thought, but what about me? So the absence of visual signage or other symbols marking their identities was highly notable by the students. So to conclude about this piece, what they saw in the university's buildings and landscape was an ableism that equates disability as wheelchair access and usage, and that essentializes disability as a concept as being both fixed and located in individual bodies. And so that it contradicted the social model. Architecture in the built environment operated counterfactually to the reality of disability in educational institutions. The power structure shaped students' imaginations around disability, identity, belonging, and normalcy. So we did point to some areas for improvement, including the value of universal design. And I am proud to say that we now have on campus a Zen Den, is what they labeled it as. I didn't create that. In the art school, in this image on the right of the gauzy cloths in the ceiling with white sprinkle lights and little stools or cushions for people to meditate. This is the image on the right is in the art building. And these two images at the bottom is from a sensory space, which is what they call it, that we now have in the library. And it has specialized furniture and lighting and headphones for people, as well as like these cushiony chairs and fidget toys and all sorts of fun things. Okay, so the second project that I worked on related to this was Just Listen to Us, was what I called it, and it's basically an evaluation of disability culture on campus, and we get a certain amount of credit if you the contractual thing that I won't bother you with, but basically I get one course release if I apply for it to do research, and I applied to do this research project to do an evaluation of disability culture on campus, which was granted to me, and I was really surprised that they did. But given that they supported it, it's kind of maybe surprising how little they've listened to the findings, but we can have that conversation too. So in addition to, I collected tons of qualitative interview data from students to build this, and the work is still ongoing. Okay, so this was the front page of the report that I just put here into the document. It has an overview and it has the rationale. The rationale, a lot of it talks about the lack of good data and what difference that would make if we actually knew who was on our campus and what they might need in order to be a good learner, to have the best opportunities to succeed in education. This project was IRB approved and part of my FSP research, as I mentioned. So I wanted to study the concept of disability culture, whether it existed on campus, and if so, where. Like, was it in the curriculum? Was it talked informally about in the dorms? And so, of course, it also looked at access on the campus and in its online content. I feel like I want to skip this slide just for time, but there were a lot of students who were involved. I did individual interviews with like 25 students that lasted an hour or two each. We held focus groups. There were at least 3 focus groups with various different communities of students, and another 45. So there were about 70 students altogether who directly contributed, but I also have decades of teaching and advising and mentoring and researching and listening to students over the years. That also, although I didn't pull that data into the quotes or specific examples, it did help to shape the framework and my understanding. Sample was diverse in pretty much everything except for traditional college age. They were mostly traditional college age and primarily white. But the vast majority of the findings here came from students with disabilities, either registered with the DRC or not. And that was really important to me that I got that sample of disabled students not registered. They varied in how they identified. Some considered themselves disabled, others identified as a person with a health condition, like I have long COVID or I have MS, something like that. Others noticed their impairment, but didn't use the word and didn't identify as disabled. There was also variation in language, whether they used identity first or person first. Excuse me. So one of the important findings came up to do with inclusion versus access. And regarding access, students felt Montclair was doing a decent job, but regarding a sense of inclusion and belonging and feeling noticed in the curriculum, event programming, and power structures, they felt that Montclair had a long way to go. When inclusion is measured in terms of access only, which it was at that time, according to Montclair's strategic plan, that means that priority is going to be given to ADA improvements and designs to make campuses legally compliant. Great. It's important, but 30 years after the ADA, like basic access and compliance should be the floor, not the ceiling. And so Montclair could do a lot better regarding inclusion. Remote options were limited and kept. I don't know if that's a past tense word, but there was gatekeeping involved. So it was really only students with who had risk because of COVID who were allowed to have remote options. So people with chronic pain or mental health issues really benefited from remote classes and showed us various ways, but they were often declined remote access as an accommodation. So one student just talked about, she didn't even think about it until she was doing it from home, but she's in a lot of pain. She can just have her hot pack and plug it in. And she's like, I'm in class and I have 2 hot packs on. Sometimes someone else said, sometimes I can't get out of bed and I just can't make it to class. And then other times I might be too manic to sit in the class. I mean, to tell you the truth, coronavirus was a godsend for me because then everything went remote. As a policy, this restriction for remote learning requires gatekeepers and creates barriers to learning, let alone a sense of belonging. Many, both chronic conditions I have up here, like chronic fatigue or autism, and many non-visible disabilities take a long time to get a diagnosis. The process is financially costly, perhaps even stigmatizing and emotionally distressing. So, and then there's also identity reasons why people might not register. But during this process, even though people are applying for accommodations, they're not receiving anything. And so they continue to struggle without assistance for months and months in order to get classes and content from their classes. So it would be really great to have full access to remote options for all students as part of a universal design that would increase inclusion for people without having to need to kind of prove it or out themselves. Do I need to say more? The Disability Resource Center on campus is a nightmare. And we've had a new leader who, during this time, who really promised a lot of change, and nothing really changed. And I could do a whole talk on this, so I'm not going to waste all of our time, but we frequently would do things and ask for their help, like to send out stuff to students, for example, to invite them to events, to do all kinds of things. And they really wouldn't do it. So I know that wouldn't reach everyone on campus who's disabled, but it would at least reach the people who are registered there, and they wouldn't even do that. So we're going to skip this for now. But students also talked about facilities, the transportation, the campus navigation, complaints about poor communication. They definitely said we need better communication overall. About access, students appreciated. We have push button doors on a lot of doors and elevators, but they complain these features often don't work properly or take too long to be fixed. I think most of us probably know the ADA does not cover weight discrimination, and yet many of the furniture in the classrooms and other kinds of structural conditions was made for much smaller people and really made learning difficult. And we also identified that disaster management has a really long way to go. There are many places on campus with stairs, and we don't have evacuation chairs or much knowledge about how to use them or other issues related to disaster management. Okay, finally, I want to talk about faculty and academics because this is sort of my area. And they had positive experiences with faculty for the most part, but they had negative experiences with faculty communication, and they found many ableist attitudes in the classroom and in the curriculum. Quote, there seems to be more understanding about blindness, deafness, wheelchair users' needs than about invisible conditions, and I think professors just lack that awareness or they just don't think about it, unquote. Other students commented on this lack of disability knowledge and particularly critical disability perspectives across the curriculum. This was several students with stigmatizing mental health conditions noted that there was misinformation from professors about these conditions. And this was particularly the case in psychology and in film, when highly medicalized understandings of disability disorders were presented without any critical perspective. And it's important, I think, to remember that disabled students often know a lot more about the topic and their body and minds than their faculty do, especially when it comes to an impairment or mental health condition that they may have. They also noted, and this really hurt me, but I can see it, that professors could have been done a better job at managing the classroom and handling other students' ableist comments to films and in discussions. So when faculty did not intervene or respond to other students' ableism in comments or shared writings, disabled students feel frustrated and unsafe. Examples included faculty not correcting students for using slurs or to refer to disabled when they refer to disabled people, or identifying non-disabled people as, quote, normal, implying disabled people are not normal, and other kinds of microaggressions that just went unaddressed. So in sum, in addition to adding and including disability-specific content and courses and modules, students also wanted to see revisions to existing approaches and to certain courses that dealt with the body or the mind. Okay, I hope I haven't bored you all too much, but this gets to my last prong, which deals with building curricula. So I continue to do this and continue to work on curricular changes, but just briefly, I've created several individual courses under the kind of anthropology title. So one is 105 is an intro to disability studies, rights, and culture. 205 is a disability and pop culture. We have a special topics course now, mental health cross-culturally, that we're hoping to develop to a real course with a number. I made effort to connect with others who are doing disability studies. So there are pockets of people doing work. I didn't feel like I had a strong community or place where we all hung together, but there were pockets. So obviously in the School of Education and in inclusive ed and teacher training, in the School of Communication and Media, I have some really great colleagues. In the School of Art and Design, I had great colleagues. I have even better colleagues. There are more of them now. And so trying to work with partners where you could and build collaborations where you can. The brown bags, we had brown bags, and this was other kind of officially brown bags where you bring a lunch and you sit around, you discuss some topics, but also informal discussions to promote workshops, talks, trainings, etc. And again, this idea to like de-ghettoize the content. So we brought in people who, as I mentioned, talked about indigenous people and institutions. We talked about deafness and business in India. So people who are interested in business or people who are interested in India would come, and then they would also learn about disability. And fingers crossed, I just submitted a proposal that has been approved on one level. It's going up the food chain, and for a disability studies minor, which will hopefully begin next fall. So to summarize, where do we go from here, says the graphic on the right. So for me, it's always been about community, how to build it. And Susan, you kind of gave away the store when you said this at the beginning of the conversation, when you said, now that we're aging and like no longer, necessarily seen as part of the young wave, how do I get young people involved? They just see me as, part of the old guard, even though, of course, I still think I'm like in my 30s or something. Even to them, that's ancient. So, and I don't think they see me as disabled, despite a lot of conversations about my identity and about invisible impairment. So I appear as not of the community of students, right? I'm disabled, but I'm not a student and I'm not young. So, how do we get better traction to grow the dream chapter is something I really would love to have us have a conversation about. Maybe it involves symbols, but maybe it doesn't. And of course, this kind of entrenched resistance that we get from the Disability Resource Center, because it's a compliance office and not a culture building office. Um, but other disability resource centers on other campuses do better work. So trying to figure out how to make that happen on our campus also. So that's it. I hope I haven't hogged the stage too much. I really do hope we have time for some conversation after. And thank you all really so much for listening to me, for inviting me. And please stay in touch. My information is here on the screen as well as, through the I Love You lead on. Thanks.
Well, we do have some questions. And I've
Okay.
got a quick comment. I kept thinking while you were speaking about little yellow school buses.
The short bus.
Because to me, that's sort of the classic, all the disabled kids, whether they need the little yellow school bus or not, they all go in the little yellow school bus and they all get stigmatized in the same way. Like they're all the same. And so, I felt like that just kept, little yellow school bus just kept going through my head.
Right? Like we've come so far, but yet nothing's changed in some ways, right? Um, I will say, Susan, that the disability shuttle on campus is not yellow, thankfully. It's the same color and branding as the other shuttle, but everyone calls it the disability shuttle. So, yeah, stigmatizing. Thank you for that.
Katja, do you want me to read your questions or do you want to?
Flexible. Did we
Do them
want to address
differently
them
and
now
after
or see if we
yourself?
have time after the second presentation?
No, why don't you do them now?
Okay, I'll pop on video for this. So both of my questions were addressing the research with the students um, on the campus accessibility and lack of accessibility. Um, So thank you for your entire presentation. It was really very interesting. My first question was considering the publication, given the egregious ableism of the second reviewer's comments, demanding a justification for the existence of disabled people in higher education. Um, I wanted to know if you had sent a complaint to the journal, and if you had, how had they handled it? Since I fully understand why you pulled the paper, given that um, I am disturbed that whoever was editing didn't cut that comment because it should never have been passed to you. It should never have been made. But again, at every step there is failure. Um, uh,
The short answer is no, I
okay,
didn't send a complaint. I don't know if it would make sense to do so now because it's so much later and it has come out in print, but and I don't even know if that person is a regular reviewer or not, because that's supposed to be anonymous. But I take your point. I should have.
yeah,
And I didn't, in part because I just have limited energy for banging my head into the wall. And so this really felt like clearly I'm not going to get any traction here. Clearly, it's going to sound like I'm just complaining because my article wasn't accepted. But I think the larger point in what you're saying is that that person should not have been a reader if this is what they're thinking about content. And so that is a larger point that I wish I had addressed now in hindsight. So thank you for raising it for me. If it ever happens again, I promise you I will.
yeah, I fully understand. I spend quite a lot of time being the person who yells at the walls within my field um, because I'm good at it. And I want to serve as the protection for everybody else. Um, but it is very hard and takes a lot of spoons to
Yeah.
keep fighting that fight over and over again.
Yeah.
Um, the
And
second
I also,
question,
if I can just say, I also had two students who, for me, I'm not at the end of my career, but I've done a lot. And but the two students really needed publications. I didn't want to hold them up
right?
also. So, yeah. But anyway, you had a second comment or question?
The second question, just and perhaps the answer is just to read the whole paper, but I was and I actually I have on my phone the information on it. I'm interested in it.
Thank
but
you.
I was curious, given your extensive discussion of um, the equivocation of wheelchair in particular and mobility device access as all of disability and being dominating the student researchers' photography and comments, and the points you made about the ways in which that's stigmatizing, et cetera, are very well taken. But I was curious if you had, given how that emerged, if you had made a point of getting or if you already had students using mobility devices and particularly wheelchairs who were working within the collection and also commenting on that process to see their perspective specifically.
So we did have people with mobility issues who participated, and obviously for them, they felt that this was a perfectly valid major point, that it was about access and wheelchair access in particular, because why the hell can't they get around our campus? Like it's a really basic thing. And so I think maybe how I presented it comes across that I'm kind of callous about wheelchair users, and I don't mean to be. I think it's absolutely essential. I'm sorry. I was rushing.
I
Um,
understand.
I,
That's
I
why I
really
wanted to
honest and
clarify.
let me clarify that, because I think it's absolutely essential that people can get to their classrooms and to their dorms. And that was something that people talked a lot about, was that not just wheelchair users, but people who had limited energy and all kinds of other fatigue issues getting from their dorm to eat, back to their dorm, back to class. Like it was just not a possibility. And so, their whole lives were structured around how to get from point A to point B. So I minimized the mobility issues in this presentation, but it's not minimized in the report itself and in the paper. I think it's very essential. Um, but it also feels to me like,
An incomplete story.
why can't we? I mean, are you kidding? It's 30 years later, like we still are fighting this thing. And yet also, meanwhile, another whole sector of students has come to college, and
Yep.
they are not being recognized or included in really any way. And I actually, so I think it's kind of both, that it's important, but it also maybe detracts from being able to focus on other folks. Like it's essential we should have it, period. No discussion. Let's move on
Right.
now to the other things. But I get what you're saying, and I apologize for that. That it seems I didn't mean to be dismissive of it.
Fine. No, it is a very fraught issue. Just to self-disclose, I have a genetic disorder and I have used a wheelchair for years, but I have also not. And currently I use uh uh well, platform crutches that are specially adjustable, because I'm messy and complicated. But I do fully acknowledge the incredible complexity of um, physical access should be a baseline we're past,
And we're
and
not.
we're not. And so, on one hand, being often the person who needs the physical access,
Mm,
it's like five alarm fire, why aren't we hitting this? But on the
yeah.
flip side, I also have other disabilities, and I'm deeply aware of the ways in which having to go back to that over and over and over again means that my needs, and then of course obviously the needs of other people, but being on both sides makes me feel it very deeply, that there are other things being missed because we're returning to the same baseline over and over again.
So if I can say another word, and I know that I don't want to eat into Nirmala's time, but I think this in some ways was also an artifact of the data were an artifact of the worlds we live in. And if you let me explain this for a minute, that our students could see discrimination against wheelchair users. They had a harder time seeing it against other kinds of impairments or issues or conditions that people had. And particularly, I asked them to take pictures of disability culture. And that they couldn't do because they hadn't been taught to see it yet, because it didn't exist on our campus. So I think if I was doing this research on a different campus where there was a much more vibrant and robust disability culture, I think people would have been able to photograph that and document that. And so that might have actually represented a higher weight of images and themes, kind of comparable to the wheelchair access. But they didn't have anything there to take pictures of that they could easily recognize and see. Um, There were a few pictures here and there, but not a lot. And so I think that also helped to kind of tamp down the concerns of other issues and also highlight the issues of the fact that it was wheelchair access that was prominent, if that makes sense.
Yes, and thank you so
I
much
think we
for
need
the
to move
comments.
on. Mark had a comment.
Oh, I thought you meant move on, move on.
Oh, sorry
No,
about
I
that.
would just my comment that I had is that I have absolutely no academic background with this. I've spent the last 36 years working with a disabled theater troupe here in Denver, Colorado, and I have disabilities myself. I dropped off a 5-story building, so I bashed myself pretty good. The thing that I've noticed is that one of the things that we did is we created a community. There used to be the people who started this they started at a small school called Betcher School they sent all the disabled kids there in the 30s because none of the schools were accessible except this one that Charles Betcher built for his daughter. So they started this here. They got the theater bug. They went out, tried to do what I did, same thing in high school, but they couldn't get cast. So they just said, let's start our own theater company. And it was that mild. It wasn't they wanted to perform. It wasn't we're making a statement.
Right.
They developed a community. And there was a community there at Betcher where they had all of these different disabilities around each other. And in family, we have everything. We've got, you name it, from cognitive to physical to mental, I mean, emotional and things like that. We take everybody. And so we have to learn how to adapt and improvise with each person, but also within the disabilities talking to each other.
Yeah.
I found there's a little disconnect because a lot of times people are used to taking care of themselves and their disability, but then you put them in a room where you've got other people with disabilities, and that we have to kind of make sure that we have that communication. My thought was maybe what worked well for us is that we've done things called a Vox Familia, where you get together a group of performers and they write their own pieces. Some of them are comedic, some of them are dramatic, some of them are vocal, spoken word, and some of them are singing. And it's something that's very easy to mount. You don't need to have a huge theater. You don't need to have this complete access. And it's mobile. But it's also something that can be very powerful for those audiences, because that's when these people can start talking about things like, how hard it is to get my prescriptions. Those little things that we were just talking about. So I thought that might be something that to reach out. I love the
idea. I love the idea. I used to work with Theater by the Blind back when it was Theater by the Blind, and now it's Theater Breaking Through Barriers in New York. So you're speaking my language. I totally get it. And I actually, that's a really smart idea. On my campus, unfortunately, I don't have good connections in the theater program. They are not, I haven't built that. I have them more in art and design. But I really hear what you're saying, and I think it's a great idea. So maybe that's my next step.
And thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. Good idea.
So, does anybody else want to jump in, or are we ready to move on? Well, thank you, Elaine.
Thank you all.
I knew you'd have powerful stuff to say.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks everybody for listening to me. I appreciate it. Stay in touch, and let's build it together.
You're welcome to stay, and we carry on after
Great.
forever. We sometimes continue to talk until midnight. Well, it all depends on how inspiring you guys have been to get us going.
All right. Well, thank you again so much. And I don't know how to undo me. Oh, good. You did. Perfect. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Well, that was a wonderful presentation. This is Alice again from the road, and I'm looking forward to the next presenter as well. As we said at the very beginning, the Disability History, Cultural and Culture Collective and the I Love You Lead On community sponsors Devva's Room monthly. We also work collaboratively with Mind Freedom and Judy's Room monthly, and after the first of the year, Justin's Room and Storytelling will be launching. And you can find all of this information on the I Love You Lead On website, as well as on various social media platforms. But we are very much in need of some financial assistance. And Ashton has done a wonderful video, so we're going to go ahead and let you hear from Ashton about how you can support us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Devva's Room. Devva's Room is a virtual space open to all, seeking to bring anyone interested in disability studies together in conversation and in solidarity. Devva's Room is inspired by the life and legacy of Devva Kasnitz and her outstanding contributions to the field of disability studies. Devva's Room is volunteer-led by members of the Disability History and Culture Collective and the I Love You Lead On community. In a 2023 reflection, Devva wrote of her determination to be more comfortable in study and advocacy and to blend them together to create a diaspora of disability studies best ideas. By holding regular events led by prominent and emerging voices in disability studies, we hope to honor this mission. Devva believed in a fully inclusive world that respected everyone's communication strategies. Inclusive and accessible technology can be costly. You can help support technology expenses for Devva's Room, which will allow us to grow and expand. If you have the resources to contribute to the development and sustainability of Devva's Room, please consider donating by scanning the QR code on your screen or by visiting the link in the chat, donorbox.org/Devva-S-room. Thank you so much for showing up and learning together with us.
And Ashton, I believe, is on the call. Ashton is an up-and-coming disability advocate and shared their lived experience. You can look at the playlist and listen to their talk. It was quite inspiring for me on a lot of different levels as an elder, and also as watching new people come into the field and make significant changes as a young person, along with his collaborator Jeff. I'm looking forward to watching what is going to happen in the next few months for them and their collections work with the Friends group and also with other groups that are working in the disability history community. Disability history is important to me because it was something that I was not taught as a disability educator, and disability studies was something that I came to late in my career. So I'm looking forward to watching as all of these things come together. And with that, we will turn it over to Nirmala Erevelles. I hope I didn't butcher that too much, and learn more about how we can do the work we do in this particularly difficult period of time where history seems to be repeating itself for many of us, or reverting back to older times that we really don't want to revisit. So take it away.
So hello everyone, I'm Nirmala Erevelles, and I'm coming to you from the University of Alabama. So you can understand why I'd be talking about difficult times, but because they are indeed difficult. Also, before I go into the content of my talk, first, I also want to say I am really honored to speak in Devva's room, particularly in honor of Devva. She was a good friend, and she was one of the kindest and warmest persons I met at SDS. Some of you may know I'm a single mom, and I used to bring my, at that time, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old little girl to SDS. And, Devva would bring her spinning wheel. And she always, like my daughter Maya was always included in almost everything that happened at SDS. And Devva was one of the key people always welcoming her. And so I felt like she was like family, and I feel honored to speak in her honor. Also, I wanted to thank, of course, Susan for inviting me, for all of you for being here, and definitely to follow Elaine, because I haven't seen Elaine for a really long time, and also your presentation was really powerful and thought-provoking. So I just want to say thank you. It's just been an honor being here. I wish I had slides and stuff, but I thought I was just going to be a little more, I thought it was a little more informal than this. And so I have a really brief, I have a presentation to give, and I will talk through it. I also want to appreciate the interpreter because just sign and tell me to talk a little slowly because when I don't have notes like to read and I get excited, my words may blur and please, um, I just want to make sure I am accessible. So thank you. So I'm glad I followed up from Elaine's talk right now because it ended up with the complexity of building community. And I think that's what disability studies has always been challenged to struggle with. And I will argue that most so in these really difficult times. Now, I apologize because, of course, I wasn't coughing the whole day, but I'm getting a little fit of something. One of the things so today I wanted to make a little shift from the conversation we've just had, particularly in a time when issues of exclusion have become normalized. I teach in a state that just made a law that discussing any divisive concepts, race, class, gender, sexuality, gender identity is taboo. The first two student organizations that were moved from their offices in the University of Alabama was the Black Students Union and Safe Zone. And this happened even before the law passed in October. So before the semester started, and our semester start in August. However, one of the only concept, and this is the irony or the contradiction, that the only category of difference that is not listed, and when I listed it just now, you all heard me, was the category of disability. And in the University of Alabama, the Office of Disability Services is actually housed along with the Office of Veteran Affairs. And you could see in some ways the thoughtfulness of that linkage in some ways, right? And in fact, it is a very well resourced, at least for students, in terms of what it can offer, though everything you said, Elaine, applies. Like it looks very well resourced, but students, and then I'm going to add, because that's where I'm doing I'm trying to be an advocate, it doesn't respond to faculty and staff needs. I also work in a state which is called a right to work state, which means they do not recognize unions and they do not have to give you a reason to fire you. And so as much as I appreciate it, and I do appreciate, I'm not saying it in any way, the amount of the critique we have to offer regarding the ways in which universities like ours do not meet the needs of students with disabilities, disabled students. They definitely don't meet any needs for faculty and staff who are invisible people on my campus, especially when their ADA coordinator or advocate works in HR. In a right to work state, having HR make decisions about whether your access needs are worthy to be met is basically terribly dangerous. And so I'm including a category of class into this discussion, just as I began with also issues of exclusion for students of color, students and faculty of color, and also students of, and also our queer and trans students on our campus. So in other words, what I thought I was going to talk about today then is to push really hard for us to think clearly and thoughtfully about what it means to enact a politics of solidarity. Something Devva, I always appreciated because I think we had some intense discussions at SDS, particularly around this issue, because I was part of the People of Color Caucus. And I think we gave Devva hell along with a lot of other people, but I thought it was always very sustaining conversations. And that's why I dearly love that. I love that relationship. Because, and to be able to talk about a politics of solidarity, we have to engage what Kimberly Crenshaw, among all the other Black feminists, have discussed this issue of intersectionality. So what I'm going to do right now is, because it is an academic, non-academic discussion, I'm going to briefly engage, just give brief definitions of what I've learned from Kimberly Crenshaw's notion of intersectionality, so we are all on the same page. Then I'm going to use an example, because I'm using an example because it speaks so clearly to the divides we have in articulating a politics of solidarity around disability. And I'm going to be talking about Gaza. So bear with me in that discussion. And when I talk about Gaza, I'm also going to talk about the relationship of the US and Gaza, and the relationship of issues of make similarities and commonalities, and show the ways in which intersectionality is really central to what these politics are. And then, because I don't have solutions to it, because I think if I had a solution, we would be practicing it. No, not really, because even though we have solutions, they don't necessarily work. But I was really thinking we need to think really hard about what community means and how we are going to, in fact, reckon with it. So I'm going to start with this issue of intersectionality that Kimberly Crenshaw discussed. And the quick and dirty way in which people kind of assume intersectionality is this kind of like hierarchy of identities or a multiplicity of identities. And those who can rack up the most number of marginalized identities are the most oppressed. But that is not what Kimberly Crenshaw argued, even though most people do the and and the and and the and, or the and the or, and then it always at some point, which is a problem, and Crenshaw herself recognized it, negated the complexity of what it means to exist at the intersections of different oppressive, and this is the word, structures. So Crenshaw, in one of her essays, very clearly discusses what she calls the three different forms of intersectionality that we have to engage at all times. The first one being what she would call structural intersectionality. And that's the one I think we can get. That it's not about identities, but at the different structures that shape people's lives. That, in other words, it's the very structures that produce the oppression, and it's the structures, more importantly, if we are talking about community, that divide us. The structures of race, the structures of class, that's capitalism, the structures of gender identity, queer straight, those the arguments that, those structures, and of course, the structure of ableism. Now, I will add here, and I have written a lot on that, but I'm not going to belabor it at that point. Kimberly Crenshaw herself, in her earlier essays, excluded disability in those discussions. And when she uses it, it's kind of problematic. But so in some ways, my critique engages all categories of difference, not just, I'm not pitting disability against or any of the other categories against disability, but really for us to be really critically aware of how all these categories of difference fail at some point if we don't engage a critical politics of solidarity, if we understand. So when Crenshaw talks about the structures, we can understand, I mean, this historical moment is ripe with what those structures are. With the current, what's going on right now in the Senate and the House. And as anybody with a disability knows right now in this room, not having access to healthcare, at the structures of difference along ableism, racism, classism, and gender identity, because in my state, it's illegal to give care to the trans community. It's completely illegal. So we cannot talk about healthcare without engaging the categories of difference. And so the very structures, the notion of access, we cannot understand access again unless it is mediated through these different structures. So structural intersectionality is literally seeing how the different structures uniquely shape our experiences of possibility and oppression depending on where we are located. So it doesn't locate an inside, truly victimized person and somebody who's not victimized, but it makes us understand the complexities of location in this discussion. The second form of intersectionality that Crenshaw talks about, and it relates, I like it because it relates really well in so many ways to Elaine's conversation and discussion, is the issue of representational intersectionality. Who is represented? What gets represented? What gets erased? Why are some representations pitted against others? The example that Crenshaw uses is she uses this logic of what she calls, like she uses that scene, with the rap group Two Life Crew, who was known for really producing misogynist lyrics, not very different from other musical genres. And so they were the ones who were arrested and put in jail. And Black women were required to see only the racialized representation of that culture, right? So if Black women critiqued it, they were being race traders. And so Crenshaw asks, how do we understand representational intersectionality that understands the competing representational needs of different communities? And it spoke very well to also the response that you just gave a few minutes ago, Elaine. Like if you're talking specifically in the disability community, the person who's the wheelchair user versus somebody who has and owns to invisible disability, these are representations that are in fact in many ways in conflict with each other because of the ways in which the politics pits them. But then when you look outside of that logic, you can also see erasure. So like the law, SB 129, which is the quote unquote anti-DEI law in the state of Alabama, whenever my dean told me, and this I'll give you a perfect example, my dean, okay, I should not say that publicly, but anyway, Eli Clare, who several of you know, came to our campus, and I had to have a difficult conversation with the authorities in my college because when I was trying to get Eli to get paid, they were like, somebody was like, yeah, the person has a disability, so he is welcome, provided he doesn't talk about those aspects of his identity that intersect with what are called divisive, because we can't, and it's not the person's fault, because we cannot spend state money on this. Luckily, my program, which is the smallest, the most underfunded social cultural studies, a doctoral student in my program, when she graduated, was clearly having a lot of money, had given us a $50,000 endowment, particularly to do things like this for graduate students or for talks that we wouldn't do it. So I was like, Eli will come to campus, we have the money to pay him. But that's also a point of privilege. But you see, so I want you to see the intersection so that while disability, to talk about disability is okay on our campus representationally, it is also posited in contradiction to other social political identities. And then the last one that I'm talking about is political identity, political intersectionality. And I think that's something we also need to think long and hard about. And that's why when I use the example, and we'll talk about it, is because political intersectionality in many ways produces tensions between the political interests of different groups. And then again, Crenshaw uses the example of Black women and violence. And she uses it actually a really powerful example of violence for immigrant women who experience domestic violence. Given that if you are an immigrant woman and you complain about violence from your spouse, who's also an immigrant on a visa, you are considered having a felony and your spouse is sent home. And because your visa is created in relationship to your spouse, if you do not have your own visa, you are sent home with the person too. So a lot of immigrant women then articulate issues of domestic violence because of the racism against also immigrants, the kind of the tenuous, not so much racism, but the tenuous relationship that immigrants or those who are visa holders have on this campus, in this country. With the same logic that we have for Black women experiencing, in many ways, domestic violence, but we could also use them in other contexts, right? So this issue of political violence, political intersectionality has the actual, even if you recognize identities, right? It's the actual political interventions that make these separations. And you can see that how clearly, again, because I use the example of healthcare, how clearly you can hear right now that so much of the rhetoric against immigrants is based on a logic that they do not deserve healthcare, that most US citizens are most deserving of and do not have. It's almost as if we're making the argument that it is because of immigrants that our healthcare system sucks. And that, as some of us know, everybody in the disability community knows, that yes, is a matter of life and death. There is no arguing that not having access to healthcare is a matter of life and death, particularly in the disability community. And so But when it's pitted against then the people who are quote unquote eating our access, eating up our access, because of them we lose access. I'm not saying disability community is making the argument, but I'm saying the general rhetoric. It produces these tensions that disenables us as a whole to see some kind of solidarity. So having said that, I therefore then want to then go to the issue, and that some of you know that that's been in some of my work. The reason I wanted to go, because I'm actually doing a paper with a colleague of mine who's actually an anthropologist, who's an anthropologist, identifies as a forensic anthropologist, Kali Rubai, who's at Purdue University, and actually a disability scholar at Purdue. Rua Williams told Kali to talk to me because Kali was actually writing about Iraq. She's actually Iraqi American, and she was writing about war in Iraq and, doing the stuff about literally moving from the Congo and looking at the places where minerals are mined, going all the way to Arizona to where weapons are made, and then going to Fallujah, where mothers post the Iraq war consistently give birth to children with microcephalus who are dying, who keep trying to have children because they fear that this is a way of, in fact, they see this, they read war, they may not use the word, but they read war as eugenic. Now, we are talking about Iraq right now. And so she kind of like, so we were having this discussion, and disability becomes a really uncomfortable category in this discussion. And so I talked to Nirmala, and I was like, oh, I don't have any answer to it, but the two of us are now working on this paper where we are trying to we are trying to write about how to engage disability in a really fraught space, which has been some of my other work. Because I've asked before, what does disability, and I was kind of like throwing in a little way, what does disability culture mean? What does disability pride mean? When some disability, and I've asked that in my book some time ago, when some of the disability is produced, people become disabled in a context of extreme violence. So one of the questions that Kali and I have been wrestling with, and I love that she asks me really hard questions and I'm asking her really hard questions, and we are going back and forth. And we actually want to write our paper as a discussion of us writing back and forth. Is where is disability solidarity in what has happened in Gaza? Because what is happening in Gaza has also links with what is happening in the US. And here we are not talking about, because I don't want to go there about the geopolitics of Israel and the Palestine. We're talking about, in this case, yes, that's there, that's going to be framed, but that's a different discussion. We're really talking about what does disability mean in one context where, because of what the genocide that has happened in Gaza, and I'm going to name the things. Yes, of course, there's death, but there's also a large amount of physical disability, the physical impairments being created. Children and adults are growing up in a context of trauma. Access needs, housing, food, education, quiet, peace, climate, environment. All these categories that we know, I'm thinking of so much of the work that some of you on this thing have also talked about, right? I mean, I'm thinking about Sonora Taylor's new book and the work that she's doing in Arizona about, the things that are going on. I'm thinking about like so much of the work in disability studies engages each of these categories in really powerful ways. And yet, this notion of what solidarity means, what access means, fails because as a community, and I put us all in it, myself included, seem to be at this precipice of seeing connections and yet finding a way to move away. This is one of the concepts that I learned from Kali, and I'm going to throw it out here for us to think about. And she's written about it, and I'll spell her name because I just wanted to make sure you'll have it right. First name is Kali, Kali. Last name is Rubai. Kali writes about, and then she was just writing about it, and then we thought of putting it within a disability studies context. She writes about this thing called injury alibi. Injury alibi, one of the things was that, which what happened in one of the presentations she gave, that when she showed an image of a Palestinian man raising to the crowd, to the camera in a news story, his dead child. She was told, and yes, we go through that whole issue of trigger warning, that was too traumatic to share. And we understood that. But the man was choosing to do this. This was not he being told, because he was saying in his argument that the world is not seeing what has been done. I am bearing witness. But it's not very different from the ways in which, and I'm thinking Rosemary Garland Thompson and the work on that issue of staring and the ways we kind of avoid looking at disability too. I understood from both disability politics and from this other real politics means that we find a way to avoid confronting our own collusion in the representational, the political, and the structural conditions that would prevent solidarity from becoming real. So and then we go, because some of y'all may know this, some of you may know I do like a very critical Marxist reading, and it's not necessary, but I talk about consumer, this notion of commodity fetishization, but we don't need to talk about it because at this point, I just want to lay the question out. And part of the reason was I was like, at this historical moment in the US, and this is why I was so angry one time when, those horrible Facebook wars you have. And I had a white, self-identified, queer Australian disabled activist. One time when we were doing something, somebody was making an argument, but, where should we stand around the fact that we don't feel comfortable around Kamala Harris, and so should we just avoid? And I had this young activist who did not know who I was or anything, and I was not blaming him for it, tell me that as an American, no, I was not American by birth, just naturalized, I should learn to be brave enough to take the chances if Trump becomes president, because we are cowards and we can't stand for the principles. And he was yelling because he was speaking now as a white activist supporting the politics, or supporting, actually very angry about, actually critiquing genocide. Sorry, that's what I was inversing it, that he was very much supposedly on the same side. And I just was like, because I said that in the state of Alabama, the people who are also experiencing in some ways genocidal experiences in a different kind of way, not in exactly, I'm not trying to make them equivalent. In rural Alabama, in the Black Belt, they don't have access to doctors. You don't have to be, an ambulance takes an hour and a half to get to some space there. People die. We have police violence. We are one of the states that refused to do the Medicaid expansion. So people are in horrible, horrible need, have needs. Education is despicable. In my city, which was supposedly when I first lived here, Tuscaloosa, there are shootings almost every other day, and we were not considered, quote unquote, a dangerous city, whatever that means. And so this tension about the ways in which we understand the complexity of how to respond in solidarity, recognizing both our similarities and differences, becomes very real if we take into account the ways in which disability can in fact be in so many ways, or the disability community can be the way to articulate a radical politics of solidarity that does not exclude an understanding of the complexities that exist. Because at this historical moment, ICE also is roaming around here. We don't actually, we are a minority, so we don't even have some of that community who can, in fact, resist. But then we also have really problematic, I'm also on the very campus where the very famous Wyatt versus Stickney law was like the court case brought at the Bryce, in quote unquote, insane asylum, actually was the one where after the court case, they tried to bring rights for most people who were incarcerated in institutions. But that very building has now been repurposed. Now get this, so this is where you understand now how disability works. It was when, it's like, it's a very, very kind of like colonial, beautiful white building with like a dome on the top, has been repurposed into a welcome center. So talk about the contradiction. They do have an exhibit on the second floor, which I have not been to because I haven't been able to go to that welcome center. It just opened, which erases the lives of disabled people, yeah, clearly, and in such a overwhelming way. So when I'm posing it here, I want us to understand that these are complex issues. It's not an either or. So while a colleague of mine and then Hillary Green, who's now left to teach at Davidson, was on this campus, she was doing those tours where she was pointing to the history of enslaved people on this campus, and she would do these alternative history tours. And we had just started talking, because I'm not a historian, we had just started talking about how could we expand this to also include disability. And then she left, but I'm really excited because I just met recently a new colleague in English who's working on abolition, queer politics, and disability. And this summer got their students to begin that project of charting that history. I don't claim to have anything for it, but when I saw them, I was like, and that's how with them, we were able to get Eli Clare to campus because I was like, I need somebody who can work with me. And they were able to do it. So this is also the other ways of thinking about how do we build solidarity? How do we think about access in critical and more powerful ways? How do we understand our politics, structural, political, and intersectional? Again, not as a retrofit, which is why I like that language, because we always do that, right? Then we find the person of color to represent, or we find the disabled person on the other side to represent, the wheelchair user, because that way we know for sure, right? And not really engage the complexities of what this politics of difference is. So maybe I will end with a question that I think will be nice too, because then we can actually, in both our presentations are really then moving to that space of let's define what is community, how do we do it, how do we enrich this idea of culture, representation, and politics in a way that speaks to all needs. And if you're hearing weird sounds, that's my dog snoring. Just letting you all know, if because she is loud to me, but you all may not hear her. Okay. So I think I'll stop here. And I think maybe I was just going to suggest that we allow Elaine to also be pinned, and then we can have this whole, I can't see, for some reason, I can't see I don't know whether there are any chats, but okay.
Um,
Does anyone have any questions? There are none in the chat so far. You can just.
I also have a way of taking all the passion from a room, so I apologize for that.
It's wonderful. No, you're not taking anything.
Nirmala, I loved so much of what you were saying, and I think some that I didn't love maybe went over my head. But I really appreciate for sure the way that you've described creating this politics of solidarity. I just love the language of it, and I loved how you described, in really simple ways, finding a connection. And you found the English class, right? The colleague. And I think that's kind of in an informal way, kind of how it started for me also, to build relations on campus. And it wasn't in my immediate network of people, but reaching out to someone who is actually different and has a different field or a different perspective on things. And growing from there, because I can learn from them and they can learn from me. And so it's kind of mutually supportive. And I work on a campus that is a minority serving institution. And yet we live in a blue state and in a very blue area of the state. And I cannot even imagine, being in your position, having to do the work that you do with such fear. I think that's, I don't know, maybe on your braver days, it can be what drives you, but on other days, it's reason to stay home. I mean, I don't really know. It must be very hard to be there right now, especially now.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, but I don't even think of it as courage, because actually not irony, but that's maybe the beauty of it all, is I actually met my colleague Bree we just started a chapter of the American Association of University Professors, because we're really fighting this issue of not just academic freedom. We also have a young adjunct get made on Charlie Kirk and fired, and she also has a disability. And so we have this chapter, and it was at this, so that's where you find that in places, it's also like, I always use that example, like actually it was something, some of you may know my late partner, Robert Young, like he was African American, and he always reminded me every time, there were sometimes when we were in Alabama, he always reminded me that The civil rights movement did not start in the liberal enclaves of New York or California, but in the most oppressive, dusty streets in Alabama. So in some ways, I just that like in some ways that's the issue. It's like, so what you said was really, it's really powerful, is you find community. And sometimes finding community in these kinds of spaces also forces you to find community outside of your comfort zones, because you'll take anyone who at some point can be an ally, and then you learn from each other, right? So that's what I learned from SDS and Devva and all of them, because just like, I may not have said that, but just like you, at one point I would have read myself as an ally in disability, but the reason you use temporarily able-bodied or TAB means eventually at this point I've got a lot of chronic illnesses, and prevents my, impairs in so many ways my own access to so many things. And so but you learn so much from the process. And I was just saying that earlier, I knew some of these things theoretically, and now I'm living them. And so this notion of building community becomes really urgent and really powerful. And actually our campus has been doing, given notwithstanding all that has happened, we haven't done the drastic things that have happened in Columbia and Cornell and Harvard and even UC Berkeley, right? So in defense, I also wanted to make sure I'm not portraying, I don't want to portray Alabama as like the dark ages, but the struggles are there, and maybe because it's easier here that people will admit they're racist, they're ableist, and they're homophobic right in front of your face, which is okay because then you can engage it, as opposed to those who are claiming that they're being inclusive.
Mm.
So it's actually, I find it much easier to engage when it's there, and people would admit, and then people are willing to learn, right? So.
I think one of the differences that I'm seeing here for my campus anyway is about issue of protest. There's been a very quieting of
Right.
protest and speech on campus for the last 2 years. And the students, I don't know. I'm trying to think of other ways that people can mark their identities and do things. Where did you go, Nirmala?
While you were talking, one of the
It
things
looked like
that,
she got kicked
that
out.
Yeah, I think
She got kicked
I
out.
apologize. I disappeared and I'm back.
Oh, anyway, I was just thinking about trying to use arts and other ways for people to demonstrate their values and to speak in a way that isn't a protest, because protests have been really quashed on our campus. And that was another thing that when you were speaking, I was thinking of that. And are students active on your campus?
We have a small section. We've had small protests. Because we also have Turning Point on campus. And like the thing about Alabama is we have all sides of the issue. Now I've been trying for many years. We did have at one point disability community little cultural thing with some of our undergrads, but that's also the problem is they graduate. And we've not like it has to come from the students, and
Exactly.
you're right. And then we are caught, there's also that issue of being politicized enough for the same issues. And that's why right now I'm actually raising it for faculty and staff, particularly staff.
Yeah.
I've had several, at least 2 people who have come to me who have panic attacks, and somebody told them that their quiet room, I like that you all had the Zen, whatever, den, is to go to a restroom and calm down. Because if you're staff, you don't have a private office. Right? And you can't also allow yourself to admit that you have some kind of, because in some ways, you're right, again, not some ways, in all ways, having certain kinds of mental disabilities are taboo. especially of a job in our state. So actually to next Tuesday at I'm on faculty senate, I'm going to try to get them to do I'm going to raise it in terms of the legal issues, the conflict of interest when HR is supposed to give you access.
That's how it's on our campus. It's like
Yeah.
the wolf guarding the hen house or whatever expression,
exactly.
because if students, it's the same thing. Students need access, they go to the resource center, the disability center. But if faculty or staff need access, we go to HR, and it becomes immediately a legal issue.
Yeah.
And so just something as simple, I had this experience for myself as an aging person wanting to have captions on our meetings. It doesn't cost any more to have captions. You can do it through Google Slides. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's something, and it would help me a lot in these big rooms. And I asked my dean directly, and he was like, "Oh, I know, whatever." So my only alternative is to go to HR. And from them to, as like a courtesy, I've been here for like 20 years. You can't just be respectful as a colleague and say, sure, I'll turn on the captions. It becomes an immediate legal issue. I have to file a adversarial relationship with my employer
Exactly.
for something
and you're tenured,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So like and that's the contradiction too, right? Because HR gives you your health insurance, and you're so afraid to have things on your health care. And majority of our staff, they pay them horribly,
Yeah.
$19,000, $20,000 a year. But they are here at the university because they want the health insurance. So you see that it becomes, so that's where the class issue happens. And that's why I started with that, because and again, I'm saying, I know I don't want me to be pitting again, because that's what intersectionality is important, is we don't want to be pitting students against others on this campus. But at least there is a possibility, a remote possibility, that disability services may advocate for a student and may get a professor in trouble if they don't. I'm saying may, it doesn't have to happen. But there is no discussion. So I had another friend was like, she had some access needs. It had to do with time, because adult ADHD, she needed her boss to just do things a little more organizedly, because he couldn't just throw it on her, because that's when she went into panic. And her boss said, no, that's the nature of the job. And if she can't do it, and that was all he said.
Yep.
He wasn't going to fire her.
He didn't have to.
He doesn't have to. But she's there, she's still working, and she's panicking. And I just, like, it gets me so angry, because there is no recourse for her.
Yeah.
And that is a vast majority. Like, we also have horrible parking, and I mean, so it is also, if you're a wheelchair user or you have some kind of physical disability, I'm just saying that we have all these issues related to staff.
Yeah.
That we cannot. So for us to also think about, like, when we are doing solidarity, that's why, like, the faculty, I'm trying to raise it in the faculty senate, but the faculty senate says they only look at faculty needs. And I'm like, but the staff we wouldn't function without staff. Right? So what do we do? So anyway, let's see how that will go. I fight lots of losing battles, because I lose, but then you keep finding ways to. Any questions or comments from the rest of y'all too? Yeah, too.
Yeah, there's a question from Katya in the chat. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, because I can't.
Okay, so it says, so this is obviously a looser talk, and that creates inherent challenges to framing and discussion that a formal paper allows for more precision. But the one thing I was considering through your comments is if there's a possibility or even a desire for a singular politics of solidarity, which seems to be the framing as I understood it, which might be incorrect given limits of extemporaneous speech and Zoom sound and captioning. But given the nuances and complexities within every layer and form of intersection difference, I wonder if searching for a politics of solidarity means a flattening of identity, politics, and history to fit a singular model, whereas a multiplicity of politics of multiple solidarities might be an approach that offers more opportunity for community. That was Katya.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Katya. And actually, I'm not talking about flattening of difference. So really, yes, it is very much a multiplicity, because that's the thing, is like the intersectional politics, remember, like in some ways is a framing,
Oh.
right? And a framing means that at different times, a different politics will come into going. It's very contextually bound. It's not about identity. It's not about in any way anything static, but it's a framing, and those frames move. So if we have to understand, like how do we understand a point of solidarity, like around the issue of access within an intersectional framework, will give us multiple modes of understanding access, not just one. And that would mean, that's why it was a politics of solidarities. Maybe I should have said that. So that I appreciate, because it means then that we will shift in terms of where we are located in different spaces. But because we don't do that, we actually instead practice a politics of competition, where we pit one identity against the other. Like, so even in the Black Lives, like, so let's take a good example, is something we're more familiar with, is the Black Lives Movement. We've known that a majority of the people who were murdered by the police have had a disability in some form or the other. Now, this is a critique. The Black Lives Movement understands it a lot within the issue of like race, that's real. But then I'm also asking, does the disability community also understand the complexity of the racial politics of lying at the intersection of race and disability? Or do we depend on only those who are Black and disabled from marking that logic? How do we as a community engage that issue without flattening one or the other? It's an issue of disability and an issue of race. It's a structural issue. It's the politics, it's the representations.
Yeah, Katya says thank you for the clarification. Yeah. And Mallory has a hand up.
Yeah. Hey, Mallory, so good to see you again.
I know. I was like, oh, two favorite scholars tonight to get to just listen to, and absolutely adored both of your talks. I feel like this is a very loose space that, you know, not needing a PowerPoint or having a PowerPoint are both acceptable.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It's cold and it's house. Put the heat on.
I don't know what that was. We did lose our interpreter. Should we wait?
Might have, because it's late. She's theoretically only staying till 9.
Yeah, so we're quite
So
long.
she was staying on longer.
Oh, that's kind. Well, I mean, I don't feel like I feel awkward if we're not having full inclusion when we're doing the presentation. I don't know if
we will have transcript corrected. So while it's not complete,
there we go. Hi, so I'm Mallory.
And so one of the things I wanted to point out is what's happening in this country right now is the opposite, really, of solidarity. It's assimilation. We're trying to eliminate anybody who's different. And anybody who is different, we're trying to make them the same as everybody else. So it's really not solidarity. It's really the complete opposite of solidarity, because it's a complete disrespect for differences. And I've seen more with the teenagers that I mentor. I'm seeing them
I think that they have in the past is the idea that it's not okay to be disabled anymore unless you're being your best typical person you possibly can be. And I think that goes to the whole thing where we're the Islamophobia and everything we want everybody to be exactly the same. And I think it makes it so much more difficult to be disabled right now because taking pride in difference is the opposite of what we're being told every day. Michelle is back.
Okay. I was like, I'm back on. This is Mallory speaking. Uh, I've been fortunate to start building community outside of campus and college and spaces like that out here. I'm currently in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I've been able to tap into some different disability community spaces and start pulling together people to either be discussing big advocacy work that could be being done or just to discuss disability studies on some level. We'll actually be starting a kind of book group in the coming year. That's an exciting thing that we'll be doing. But right now, we're mostly meeting up once a month to get coffee and spend time together in a space where we don't have to be like our shiny, bright, being all you can be disabled super crips. We can actually, be around folks that get it and understand why everybody sitting around the table has oily hair because we're all struggling to shower. And sharing those spaces. And I've had the privilege of taking from one of the intersectionalities of words. Sometimes words are so hard these days. The intersectionality, I've been privileged to be able to connect largely with the trans community that's been experiencing disability on a level that they've they're, it's so hard to hold space sometimes when people's medical needs aren't being met and they're fighting to get diagnoses, and these things are all going on while they're just trying to keep their head above water with a basic some job or another that they found or not. And it's been a privilege to be able to hold and create space for that on a non-academic space. And I just wanted to share with you that that's how you create community is holding the coffee hour, setting up the space.
Mallory, I thank you so much for saying that. And what you said reminded me of something else that I actually had brought into my class. She's a parent and she started this parent group, and it's literally called the Friday Morning Montclair group because they got together and had coffee on Friday mornings. And so it was like, 8 people or something. And now she has this group of like 500 people. And, they still have coffee on Friday mornings. People can come or not come, but the list of people who are part of this collective has grown and grown and grown. And so I think there's something to be said for the, show up as you are. You don't have to be your perfect self, and find others. And I love that. I love that you're doing that. I think it's really inspiring to me. And I'm not sure I'm extroverted enough to do it myself. But I will I promise you I'll at least try once.
I'll send you some stickers too. Stickers help.
Okay. And Nirmala, I wanted to respond to one thing you were saying about the intersectionality. And I think this is something that I really wouldn't have thought about myself given my positionality, but like Mallory, what you were talking about, it kind of just reminded me. We were having a conversation in class and one of my undergrad students, they're doing this project on as I said, we're a minority serving institution, so it's Hispanic serving, and there's a lot of fear among our students from ICE coming to campus because the president of campus has said that they, legally they have to allow them here, and they're going to, not block them. And so the students are terrified. And one of the students in my class, I did not know he was a trans man, and he said, if something happened to me, not only do I get deported or put in jail, he goes, I also lose access to my medications, my hormone treatments. And it just dawned on me. So, like the power of that, like it had so many layers. It didn't flatten things at all. It actually added nuance into a way that I had not been thinking about the issue, and that suddenly I did because of his comment. Um, it's terrible what people are facing right now. So, just being with others, I think the solidarity in the community is really maybe what's most needed right now.
And I was just going to appreciate both of you because I was writing down, I'm such a nerd, so I don't feel I'm not an organizer, but I think so, like I was taking down the things that sometimes it's little, as you said, the little things that make the possibility of community. But I think that was so what both of you all are saying, and particularly what you said right now, Mallory, was this issue of holding space.
Mm.
And it used to be this kind of hip thing to say, but it becomes but in this current context, see, that's what, like, with so many things that you be like, I'm holding space for you, I'm holding whatever. And now it's like almost this, it allows this small window of possibility. Like I've had students come to me because, in our classes, most of my students are very conservative. And then you'll have this one student come to me after class and say, thank you, Dr. E, for saying what you said. That's all. It open, it's just something like, and I wasn't even, sometimes, like you said, you're not aware because, people don't have it. And so that's when I've realized, and that's why I also tell my students, because even though several of them are conservative, they've also have learned over the years because they're also nice people. We don't have to always locate them. And so they realize, especially teachers, because you can't even say the word queer or trans in a public school in Alabama. You can be fired because that's taboo. Like, it's bad. So queer students, like this is where, so right now it's actually queer and trans students whose lives are totally upended in my state. And for me, telling them how do you hold space while also still keeping your job, because it's not that they're keeping their job, because you need people who are thinking of, you need safe people on these campuses for the kids who have no space. So we kind of like brainstorm about what does it mean to provide it in a space where even saying the word, because you're supposed to apparently report it to the parent, and some young people are afraid of stuff. And the school, like, I mean, they're like, oh my God, the politics. We have he's currently the senator, Tuberville, if you may have heard of him, and now he's going to be running as governor. So it's going to be worse. He's a senator. He was just speaking at the federal level, but he has been saying the most horrible things. And I really think that also just opening a space where there is like protest doesn't also have to be rah rah. Protests can also be opening a space, because the one thing the law, we were very involved in trying to make the law better from the faculty senate. The law says that you don't have to force students to accept an argument. You cannot compel assent. So we use that. So I'll say I'm opening up a space for a different argument. And students will learn from that, because that's how because mostly I'm teaching teachers. That's how you do it. It's just modeling an alternative in a very repressive space, and that you can do it in a way that fits the law and yet opens up possibilities, but then also enables ways for people to see. That's the thing, is also, see, sometimes because we don't always talk about what I call the relational politics, that what is happening here is related to what's happening there, you know, that we can't, like even identities, that's why intersectionality, by thinking of them as closed identities, is a problem, Because even identities, which part of disabled and trans would you separate in the argument, or in the and immigrant? How do you separate which is 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, or 3/3, whatever? You see what I'm saying? There's no mathematics for that. And so how do you engage that in a much more like, people can then be able to see that you don't have to have the identity to be able to find solidarity, right? And so anyway, I mean, yeah, and I'm still trying to find, I think we all try to find ways to, that's what's really good in this discussion, that we're all trying to find ways to push back against this kind of fascist, ableist, racist, classist, colonial space, right? We are doing it at all times and different ways. That's why this more, like, even like, I love that giving. I apologize for missing last time. The last time I was supposed to come, I was unwell. But I want like, this is such a. I will leave the space feeling nurtured just because of the ideas and the questions and the comments that came.
And the people.
I hope all of y'all feel the same way, right? So
yeah. And definitely the people.
Yeah.
So I don't know everyone on this call, but Nirmala, and I don't know why all of a sudden I'm mispronouncing your name, and Mallory and Susan, and I know some of us kind of go back a long ways, and I put a photo in the chat for you, Nirmala, of Maya. I thought you were in the picture, and Devva was in the picture, which is why I was looking for it, but it actually, Devva's not in it, but your daughter is in it.
Oh.
So I just found it on my phone from ages ago.
So we don't have to end the evening now, but we are going to end the recorded portion of the evening, and we can continue to stay afterwards. So I'm going to share a slide right now. Are there any other questions for the public part of this? Let's see. So let me just share my screen for the little, let's see where it is. Here we go. Oh, there we go. So for updated information, schedule registration, you can always visit us at www.iloveyou-leadon.com/Devva, DEVVA, or bit.ly / or maybe that's / actually, Devva's Room. The D and the R of Devva's Room are capitalized. There's a QR code on the screen too for past episodes. The playlist on YouTube, which is bit.ly /Devva's Room playlist. D for Devva, R for room, and P for playlist are capitalized. Thank you for joining us. I will end the recording now.